On behalf of the Division on Addiction, welcome to the webinar, Situational Practice for the Treatment of Gambling Disorder and Other Expressions of Addiction. Thank you for your patience while we navigate the technical difficulties using the GoToWebinar software during this international outage. My name is Vanessa Graham, and I am the Administrative Research Coordinator at the Division on Addiction at Cambridge Health Alliance. This event features Drs. Howard Schaefer and Heather Gray. Dr. Schaefer is the former director of the Division on Addiction and now holds the title of Distinguished Faculty. He is the Morris E. Chaffetz Associate Professor of Psychiatry in the field of Behavioral Sciences at Harvard Medical School. Dr. Schaefer has had an active research career, serving as principal or co-principal investigator on many government, foundation, and industry-sponsored research projects around the world. Additionally, Dr. Schaefer is licensed as a clinical psychologist in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and has an active private practice. Dr. Schaefer is the founder of the American Academy of Healthcare Providers in the Addictive Disorders. Dr. Gray is Associate Director of Academic Affairs at the Division on Addiction and an instructor in psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. Dr. Gray and her colleagues study the development of and recovery from a variety of addictive disorders. In addition to publishing peer-reviewed papers and technical reports, Dr. Gray advances our educational and outreach activities. This webinar is sponsored by the Massachusetts Department of Public Health's Office of Problem Gambling Services and directed by the Division on Addiction. The Division's funding sources are listed on the website listed here. Don't worry about writing down this URL. If you would like to receive a PDF of these slides after the webinar ends, email Dr. Gray at hgray@challiance.org. Claiming CEU credits. Continuing education credit agencies for this webinar include the American Psychological Association, American Academy of Healthcare Providers in the Addictive Disorders, National Association of Alcoholism and Drug Abuse Counselors, National Board for Certified Counselors, and the Massachusetts Board of Registration in Nursing. To receive these CEU credits, you must be registered for this webinar and complete the evaluation survey at the end of the webinar. Shortly after the webinar ends, or you've watched this recording, you'll receive an email with a link to the survey. 5 business days after you complete the survey, you will receive your certificate of completion. If you have any issues with the survey, email vgraham@challiance.org. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Gray.
Thanks, Vanessa. Here's a roadmap for today's webinar. First, I'll review some important principles of effective addiction treatment. I'll be drawing upon the evidence-based practice triad and our current knowledge about the integrated nature of addiction, including an overview of the syndrome model of addiction. Next, I'll review what is known about empirically supported treatments for gambling disorder. Then Dr. Schaefer will discuss situational preparedness. His topics will include from screening to formulations and diagnosis, motivational enhancement and alliance building, understanding and exercising ambivalence, transference and countertransference, and considering comorbidity. Our intention is that by the end of this webinar, you'll be able to describe the evidence-based practice triad, apply the evidence-based practice triad to addiction treatment, list the empirically supported treatments for gambling disorder, and consider clinical strategies and tactics for a variety of situations. Let's now turn to the principles of effective addiction treatment, beginning with an overview of the evidence-based practice triad. According to Norcross and colleagues, evidence-based practice means making treatment decisions on the basis of 3 factors. First, the best available evidence, research that is clinically relevant, accurate, unbiased, and conducted according to high methodological standards. Second, your own clinical expertise, taking advantage of your past experience and training. And third, your patient's needs, including individual characteristics such as their personality and cultural backgrounds. It isn't enough to be aware of these sources of information. Rather, the successful use of evidence-based practice involves the integration of these sources. You, as a treatment professional, will guide the integration of these sources and work with patients as collaborators towards success. In this webinar, we'll help you apply the evidence-based practice triad to addiction treatment, primarily by describing the best available evidence and promoting your clinical expertise. I'll switch now to the best available evidence regarding the integrated nature of addiction. Put simply, the integrated view of addiction states that things do not cause addiction. Rather, the development of addiction depends upon a complex interaction among our bodies, our minds, our experiences, our social settings, and properties of the potential object of addiction. The syndrome model of addiction, which was first advanced by Howard Schaefer, Debbie LaPlante, Richard Labrie, and others here at the Division on Addiction back in 2004, advances and expands upon this integrated view of addiction, and it has important implications for how addiction should be treated. I'll describe it next. The syndrome model distinguishes among distal antecedents of addiction, the premorbid addiction syndrome phase, and expressions, manifestations, and sequelae of the addiction syndrome. First, in the left side panel are distal antecedents. The current view is that neurobiological elements, such as genetic risk and neurobiological system risk, combine with psychosocial elements to create an underlying vulnerability. The phrase neurobiological system risk needs some unpacking, so consider this case study. You might have heard of Nick Sheff. Nick and his father both wrote memoirs of Nick's addiction. In Nick's memoir, he describes the first time he smoked pot. He says, "I first smoked pot when I was 11. I felt this very immediate sense of relief. Up until that point, I had felt so insecure and uncomfortable in my own skin. I just didn't fit in anywhere. Smoking pot for the first time felt like the first real answer that I had ever found." So Nick's neurobiological system put him at risk. His brain was especially sensitive to the reinforcing properties of marijuana. But this vulnerability alone does not account for addiction. In order for an individual to experience addiction, he or she needs exposure to an object, like a drug, or an activity, like gambling. More than that, he or she needs an opportunity to interact with that drug or activity. Some drugs or activities are more likely than others to produce an immediate neurobiological consequence, resulting in a desirable subjective shift, or to make us feel good. When Nick Sheff was still a teenager, he learned through repeatedly interacting with different substances that he could count on them to make him feel good, or at least to feel less bad. At this point, he was in a premorbid addiction stage in the middle panel of this figure. During this stage, a person might teeter on a delicate balance that can shift him towards more or less healthy behavior. Imagine situations that might push someone towards unhealthy behavior. A personal crisis, like getting divorced or losing a job. We call these proximal antecedents. But now imagine situations that could push a person toward healthier behavior. Maybe they're seeing a provider for a drinking problem, and that provider takes the opportunity to screen for gambling problems. That person might realize that she's starting to lose control over her gambling and learn ways to manage it before it develops into full-scale addiction. You as providers have real opportunities to intervene during this stage. Now let's move to the right side of the panel. Here's where we start to see manifestations and sequelae of addiction. Some are unique to each expression of addiction. So, for instance, a person with an alcohol use disorder has unique risk for liver cirrhosis. A person with a gambling disorder has unique risk for gambling debt. A person who can't stop smoking has unique risk for lung cancer. And a person who uses IV drugs has unique risk for sepsis. The syndrome model states that despite these unique aspects, there are many common manifestations and sequelae. In the biological cluster, people with both behavioral addictions and substance use disorders experience the biological hallmarks of addiction, tolerance and withdrawal. The psychological cluster includes psychopathology as both a cause and consequence of addiction. In the social cluster, people with different expressions of addiction experience common risk factors and consequences, including deviant behaviors and social drift. The natural history is similar across different expressions of addiction, including the temporal sequence that I've reviewed here, going from vulnerability to exposure to expression to full-scale addiction. The idea of treatment nonspecificity means that approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy might work equally well with people who have different expressions of addiction. And finally, people with addiction often experience object substitution. So for instance, an increase in sedative use during decrease in opioid use. In the longer term, people sometimes switch from one expression of addiction to another, especially if their underlying vulnerability and profile of risk factors hasn't been fully addressed. I'm going to turn now to empirically supported treatments for gambling disorder. My colleagues and I recently conducted a review of all the published research in this area. Our goal was to highlight the best available evidence for treating gambling disorder to help you and other providers provide evidence-based care. We conducted a large-scale search of the published literature. We retrieved 8,568 peer-reviewed studies, which sounds like a lot, but many of them were not relevant to our question. And earlier, when I was discussing the evidence-based practice triad, I said that if you base your clinical practice on available research, you should be using research that was conducted according to high methodological standards. We put that into effect in this literature review. One of the things we looked at was whether the authors only compared participants' gambling from before treatment to after treatment. The graph on screen right now shows data from a hypothetical study of people assigned to an intervention for gambling disorder. The outcome is how much money on average people spend on gambling from before treatment to after treatment. What you see here looks like a pretty positive effect of the treatment. But we have to keep in mind that usually people enrolled in a clinical trial are already motivated to change and will show some improvement in their gambling, regardless of what group they've been assigned to. It's not enough just to find that people improve over time. We excluded studies like this from our analysis. Instead, we required that the study determine whether people assigned to the intervention improve more over time, more than those in a control group. Once we imposed this and other methodological standards, only 46 studies remained in our sample. And we kept in mind that the treatments you provide are a combination of at least two basic elements. The treatment approach, so for instance, whether it be cognitive therapy, psychoanalysis, humanistic therapy, or behavior therapy, and the format in which you deliver that treatment, whether it be individual therapy, group therapy, remote therapy, or something else. So in this review, we distinguish between the treatment approach and the delivery format. We found that there are three empirically supported treatment approaches for gambling disorder. They are one that is predominantly cognitive behavioral therapy, one that is predominantly motivational interviewing, and one that is a mix of these two, an integration of cognitive behavioral therapy and motivational interviewing. As you might have guessed, the most frequently studied treatment approach is CBT. Very briefly, this treatment approach attempts to change thoughts and behaviors that maintain disordered behavior, in this case gambling. For gambling, CBT will include correcting cognitive distortions related to gambling, like an illusion of control. In addition, CBT for gambling often will include seeking to improve problem-solving skills, social skills, and relapse prevention skills. Validated manualized approaches, including Bob Laduser's Overcoming Pathological Gambling, are available for those of you who might want to learn more about CBT for gambling. The second empirically supported treatment approach for gambling disorder, as I mentioned earlier, is motivational interviewing or motivational enhancement. These are brief therapeutic strategies designed to lower resistance and enhance motivation to change. They frequently supplement other treatment activities, but they can also be used on their own. Dr. Schaefer will talk more about putting motivational interviewing or motivational enhancement into practice. There have been a number of studies of motivational interviewing for gambling. Notably, some studies of a single session of motivational interviewing for gambling demonstrate favorable clinical outcomes, extending to as long as 12 months. We need more research to know whether these effects extend beyond 12 months. And I don't have a slide for it here, but as I mentioned earlier, the third empirically supported treatment approach is a combination of these two, CBT and motivational interviewing. As I mentioned earlier, we studied delivery formats separately. We found that there are 5 delivery formats that we can label as having best available empirical evidence. And these are brief interventions, group therapy, self-help, individual therapy, and therapy delivered remotely. So when you are providing evidence-based care for gambling disorder, you have some options for both which treatment approach to use and which way to deliver that treatment. There are 3 treatment approaches that have solid empirical support and 5 delivery formats. You can use this information to tailor your practice according to each patient's individual needs. At this point, I'm going to turn the webinar over to Dr. Howard Schaefer to discuss situational practice and preparedness.
Again, on behalf of the Division on Addiction, welcome to this webinar, and we apologize for the technical delay. Thank you, Dr. Gray, for your presentation. Like anyone getting ready for a test, competition, or challenge, readiness or practice are essential activities. You need to know what to practice and how to implement treatment strategies central to getting ready to provide treatment. You also need a guiding strategy. You need to know your own strengths and weaknesses. You need to know what you think, how you think, and what you assume about the disorder that you're preparing to treat. These are overlapping threads, and I will discuss them as a fabric, as a blended set of issues. And to do this, I want to cover screening, assessment, formulations, and alliance building, motivational enhancement, ambivalence, transference and countertransference, and comorbidity. These are themes, and these are themes designed to help us deal with addictive behaviors. And there's an old saying, for every complex problem, there's a solution that's simple. I think that's not quite right, though. I think H.L. Mencken had it more accurate. And Mencken said, for every complex problem, there's a solution that's simple and wrong. The ultimate treatment question that we face is which therapy, with which therapist, with which patient, at which point in the natural history of addiction yield the most favorable clinical outcomes. This sounds like a treatment matching problem, and ultimately it is a treatment matching problem. What do we mean when we talk about situational preparedness? Consider the situations that athletes prepare for when they practice. The Patriots, the New England Patriots, and their head coach, Bill Belichick, use the term situational football to describe the practice of preparing players for every situation that they might encounter during an actual game and even beyond. Belichick and his staff have had players practice situations that they might encounter in a game, even if only rarely. For example, the Patriots regularly practice two-point conversion plays, onside kick, certain kinds of field position, and weather-related circumstances, even though each of these situations is relatively uncommon. Fans might remember that against the Seattle Seahawks, the final play of the Super Bowl involved anticipation by Malcolm Butler that permitted a goal line interception and allowed the Patriots to win their 5th Super Bowl championship. Butler was prepared cognitively and physically for that very moment. He had seen that situation before and reacted accordingly. And needless to say, this kind of approach has yielded championships. And interestingly, it rests on a very popular phrase, which is to just do your job. Just do your job amounts to knowing what's the right clinical intervention and then repeating it. Think about an eyedropper approach to counseling and psychotherapy. Imagine that you have a large vat of clear liquid and your job is to make it turn a color. But you only have an eyedropper and some food coloring. You put a drop in the vat, what happens? Apparently nothing. But you do it again, apparently no change. And again, apparently no change, depending upon the size of the vat. And then, eventually, at seemingly the influence of a single drop, the vat changes color after adding only one drop. But was it really one drop that changed the color of the liquid? Or was it all the drops in sequence? I want to encourage you to consider the treatment and clinical activities that you're involved in as an eyedropper with food coloring, to repeat over and over again those things that you know to be the right kind of interventions. So let's talk for a few minutes about screening, assessment, formulations, and ultimately diagnosis. Regardless how we talk about these 4 activities, I want to emphasize that you should be always working on building a strong alliance between you and your clients. So let's look at the BBGS as an example of a screening instrument. This is the brief biosocial gambling screen. It includes 3 questions, and 3 questions discriminate recreational gamblers from gamblers with a gambling disorder. Here are the 3 questions. During the past 12 months, have you become restless or irritable or anxious when trying to stop or cut down gambling? It's sort of a withdrawal question. The second question, during the past 12 months, have you tried to keep your family or friends from knowing how much you gambled? Third and finally, during the past 12 months, did you have such financial trouble as a result of your gambling that you had to get help with living expenses from family, friends, or welfare? This has become known as a bailout question. A positive response to any one of these 3 questions suggests that a person is a candidate for further assessment and evaluation. Let's keep in mind what Carl Menninger said when he reminded us that treatment depends on diagnosis. And even the matter of timing is often misunderstood. One does not complete a diagnosis and then begin treatment. The diagnostic process is also the start of treatment. Diagnostic assessment is treatment. It also enables further and more specific treatment. So when you begin to see a client and screen them and evaluate them after positive screening and evaluate them even further so that you can generate a diagnosis, All of these things represent treatment activities. So from greeting to seating, try to replicate how you interact with your clients and how the settings within which these interactions occur. You want them to be stable and consistent. Arrange the furniture in your office, in the waiting room, in the hallway that takes you to your office in a consistent pattern. In my office, for example, I often have put my furniture in such a way that clients have a choice between a couch, a soft chair, and my desk chair, all available to them as they walk into my room. And I can tell you that for each person that sat in my chair next to my desk, an ultimate diagnosis of sociopathic personality emerged. Let's talk about taking a history. We often think about taking a history as simply having a chat about background material, but I want to encourage you to feature as soon as possible history taking about sexual activity and suicidal ideas or issues. And the reason for that is once the therapeutic relationship develops, biased reporting and impression management will creep into the discussions you have with your clients. Early on, when clients don't know what you want or what pleases you, they'll give you the most accurate history. Now, sometimes it's a little bit difficult to begin with sexual history or suicidal issues. You have to judge with each client how your relationship is developing and when to bring these kinds of questions into your evaluation. But the sooner, the better. When you ask questions about gambling and other expressions of addiction, format your questions so that you don't ask whether somebody's used the drug or if they've gambled. Format your question in the positive sense. What games do you play when you gamble? What drugs have you used? You have to assume that people are gambling and using drugs, and there's good reason for that. The research reveals that the vast majority of people in the United States, for example, have gambled or have used some kind of psychoactive substance. So it makes sense to assume that, that your clients have too. Make sure you ask again about suicidal thoughts and behaviors. Don't let that sit. People might think that that's a taboo subject, but in fact, most people will respond to you about those kinds of questions. Get the details. Think about the small issues. What have they thought about? Do they have a plan? Is there a method available to them? Do they have means to fulfill that plan? And evaluating these kinds of ideas will help you determine the severity of their issue. You should also pay attention to the changing perspectives of your clients. Also pay attention to your own shifting perspectives. But clients might come into your practice after a central intake and say something like, do I have to answer these questions again? I've already done it. I've answered these questions many times. In fact, I just answered these questions a couple of days ago during my intake evaluation. It's a form of resistance. Instead of not following your plan, simply remind the client that they're always changing. Their perspective and judgment about themselves, about their history, is always changing, and this provides them with an opportunity to pay attention to the changes that have occurred, evaluate the changes that have occurred, and think about themselves from a different perspective. This also gives you the opportunity to plant the seeds of change, which is something you always want to do in treatment. Always have people thinking about those things that are changing, even when they're less than favorable. because if you can help them get worse, you can help them get better. The process of assessment leads to the idea of formulations. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the idea of formulations, but formulations help us answer the question of, are we understanding the problem or the patient? So there are two kinds of fundamental formulations, a clinical formulation and a psychodynamic formulation. Ongoing assessment in general practice gives you the opportunity to revise these formulations. You don't have to be perfect and have them completed in one visit. But you might begin with a clinical formulation. And clinical formulations provide an understanding of the problem. There are three basic questions you need to answer to develop a clinical formulation. Is the source of the problem primarily psychological, biological, or a combination? So you want to be able to understand your client from a psychological, biological, or combined perspective. Secondly, is the patient primarily psychotic, neurotic, or character disordered? Now, you might not know what psychosis, neurosis, or character disordered is, so let me very briefly and in an oversimplified way, tell you what these things are. When we think about psychosis, we're talking about information in to a person, and they don't respond the way most people do, and in fact, their information out is not balanced with their information in. Neurosis is like having a stone in your shoe. It bothers you a lot, but other people don't really care. So a neurotic person is someone who's bothered by a difficulty, but it doesn't really interfere with their life in any significant way. A character disordered person is like someone who's smoking a cigar in the elevator. It doesn't seem to bother them at all, but it bothers everybody else. So character disordered people tend to cause commotion and difficulty. And finally, does the client require immediate intervention, no intervention, or something in between? Now, being able to answer these three sets of issues will let you determine an immediate treatment plan. And it will permit you to make better use of your clinical supervision if you're in that kind of a situation. Let's shift to a psychodynamic formulation, which is a way of understanding the patient. So how do we understand the patient as a person? So we're not asking about the problem. We're not asking an emergency room visit type of question. We're asking about how a person got to be the way they are, socially, emotionally, economically, and biologically. How do they get to be the way they are? What's their character and defensive structure like? What's their nature? What's their being? How do they handle stress? How do they handle loss? What about the joys in life that they've experienced? We want to know how someone got to be the way they are. And if this ever leads to a diagnostic activity, a DSM-5 activity, for example, I want to remind you of the work of my colleague Arthur Kleinman, who wrote, if classification is applied as a tentative model, not an edifying map, with serious concern for its likely inadequacy to grasp the subtlety, ambiguity, and obdurate humanity of the sick, if it's distrusted, received as a mere shorthand, regarded as one version among others, then it's more likely to be adequate to what should be the humane core of clinical work. When we diagnose our clients, we want to understand them through and through. And diagnosis reflects an ancient Greek term that really stands for understanding through and through. In order to accomplish such an understanding, it's vital that you pay attention to the small things. Emily Dickinson said, if you take care of the small things, the big things take care of themselves. You can gain more control over your life by paying closer attention to the little things. Well, that's true for your clients, but it's also true for caretakers. They have to notice the little things. If somebody's dozing in the waiting room of a drug treatment program, they might be tired, but they might be under the influence of central nervous system depressants. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle once wrote, it's long been an axiom of mine that the little things are infinitely the most important. So let's think about addiction and break it into three component parts. The object of addiction, part one, drug or gambling activity. It could be some other activity, but whatever the object of addiction is a central pillar upon which our understanding of addiction rests. Our set, the psychological expectation of the person who's using drugs or gambling, for example. And third, the setting, the social context of drug or gambling behavior. The notion of drug set and setting emerged from Norman Zinberg by his famous book of the same title. Well, our understanding seems to reflect evidence, but evidence is complicated. How clinicians gather evidence, interpret evidence is complicated. And I'm reminded of the great philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein. A student once asked Wittgenstein, weren't people stupid before Copernicus to think that the sun rotated around the earth? Wittgenstein thought a bit, and then he said, perhaps so, but what would it have looked like if the sun did rotate around the earth? And of course, the answer is it would have looked the same. The sun would appear to rise in the east and set in the west. But we know that it doesn't. We know that the earth is not the center of the universe. We know that the sun is not the center of the universe because we have a different understanding and we've had the opportunity to see different perspectives. William James, the great Harvard psychologist, wrote many years ago, while part of what we perceive comes through our senses from the object before us, another part, and it may be the larger part, always comes out of our head. So ideas, you see, have consequences. Richard Weaver reminds us that ideas have consequences. How we think about things, how we expect things to happen in our environment, influence how we experience life and how we evaluate others. From Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, Lewis Carroll knew that expectations were vital, and he wrote, I know something interesting is sure to happen, she said to herself, whenever I eat or drink anything, so I'll just see what this bottle does. We always want to be working towards the expectation of change in our clinical work, and we always want to know that something interesting is sure to happen, even if we don't know what it is. My colleagues and I wrote a book several years ago on Change Your Gambling, Change Your Life. And it's a self-help or guide for clinician-client relationships about how to change gambling. And one of the keys from this book is to create a change metric, some metric, a simple one, for example, like a 1 to 100 scale, where you can ask your clients early in your experience, early in a single session, how anxious are you feeling on a scale of 1 to 100, where 1 represents as comfortable as you've ever been and 100 as anxious as you've ever been? I'll give you some number. And then at the end of the session, a single session, ask them the same question again. And often, in fact, the vast majority of the time, clients will give you a number different from the one when they began the session. It doesn't matter whether that number is more favorable or less favorable. They'll give you a different number. You can remind them then that they're changing already. And if you make things worse, you can make things better. So let's think now about motivational enhancement strategies for exercising ambivalence. Most motivational enhancement strategies want to augment pre-existing motivation by recognizing the influence of ambivalence and improving the therapeutic alliance. This is accomplished by recognizing that clients, just like scientific theorists, are ambivalent about change. Scientists really don't want to change their theories. They'll accept new evidence, but they usually are resistant. Clients have identified themselves as a certain type of person, and they usually don't want to change their identity. So it's difficult for them to change. Motivational enhancement strategies assume, and this is very important, that client motivation is insufficient to stimulate or sustain change. Let me repeat this. They assume that clients have insufficient motivation to change. And as a result, they are attempting to enhance motivation. So motivational interviewing, the terrific work by my colleague Bill Miller, says that the outcome of treatment is a function of motivation plus motivational enhancements and external forces. And the external forces include social settings, psychiatric status, education, physical health, and so on. But the important aspect of this model is that it assumes that existing motivation is insufficient for client change, and therefore we have to enhance it. An alternative view of motivational enhancement is resistance reduction. I developed this idea with my colleague Gary Simoneau, and here we say that motivation divided by resistance plus external forces equals treatment outcome. So motivation doesn't stand alone, it stands against resistance. If we can reduce resistance, motivation increases. So we're assuming, contrary to motivational interviewing, that sufficient motivation for change exists, but it's being blocked by resistance. Reduce resistance and enhance existing levels of motivation. So how do we deal with resistance? We need to remember that resistance, difficulty changing, is how people protect themselves. It's how they maintain who they are. It's how they maintain a stable identity. And again, science reflects a parallel process. If we can tolerate the kind of resistance that science exhibits, and even revere it, we should be able to do it with our clients as well. Resistance usually is the result of how clinicians influence patients. It's not something clients own. Clients are protecting themselves against being psychologically poked, if you will. Resistance should be met with thoughtful reflection and wonder, both in and out of treatment. In every exchange that you have with your clients, exhibit reflection and wonder. Some of you might be too young, but others might remember Columbo and his open-ended, curious questions of wonder. Can you help me out here? I'm confused. How's this going to work for you? Don't think about Dragnet's Science Sergeant Friday, just the facts, ma'am. We really don't want to question or have conversations with our clients with just the facts. We really want to know over and over again, how's this going to work? What is this going to do for you? What is this going to cost you? So for example, after learning about a client's intention to detoxify or quit gambling or drugs, we shouldn't be congratulating them. We don't really know how this is going to work for them, and relapse rates are about 85 to 90%. Let's not disappoint people. Let's ask them, what are they going to get by detoxifying? What are they going to get by quitting gambling? What are they going to lose by succeeding to be abstinent? Treatment needs to focus on resistance. I would argue that focusing on resistance is the cornerstone of a good therapy. By reducing resistance, motivation increases. Now, we also need to reduce resistance by exercising ambivalence. Ambivalence makes treatment tolerable and builds a therapeutic alliance by recognizing ambivalence. Let me help you understand this. Division is a double-edged sword. It serves while it destroys. When we let clients know that we understand that addiction has benefits for them, they realize that we have the essential insight into their problems. I'm going to talk more in a moment about ambivalence, but I want to encourage you to consider both the benefits and the harms of addiction whenever you talk about ambivalence and resistance. Now, motivational interviewing and resistance reduction are complementary methods. They're not exclusive, and I would encourage you to use them both together. And clinicians must exercise ambivalence whether or not they see clients changing in the short term. Remember the eyedropper? The vat didn't change color in the short term, it changed color in the long term. We need to stay the course with the treatment interventions and treatment activities that we know work. And exercising ambivalence for addiction represents the architecture, the central features of addiction treatment. Exercising ambivalence reduces the likelihood of countertransference hate reactions and helps to develop, importantly, a cognitive wedge between impulse and behavior. Here are some common resistance situations. I don't have a problem, but my family thinks I do. That's why I'm here. Other clients will say, I don't want to be here at all. Other clients still will say it's all their fault. It's all their fault. They think that I'm the source of all their problems. In each of these cases, you want to exercise mixed feelings, ambivalent feelings. Let me give you a clinical example. Many years ago, I saw a 15-year-old boy with short sleeves and heavy track marks, severe track marks on both his arms. It was a cold February day, too cold for short sleeves, but he came into my office that way anyhow. He didn't want to participate in treatment at all. He claimed his parents made him attend. I asked him a simple question. Do you do everything that your parents ask? He said, no. And then I asked, so why did you choose to attend? He said, I don't know. I asked him if he wanted to show off his track marks. He said that he didn't like shooting heroin, but that he was a big man on campus because he did have track marks and other people knew about it. He claimed that he didn't like the effects of heroin and he'd prefer to do something else. This led to an extended discussion about the parts of him that chose to come, the parts of him that would like to learn a different way to have track marks as a way of protecting himself against bullies. And ultimately, it led to a treatment alliance because he understood that I understood that he got something from his addiction. He benefited from his track marks, and that I understood that part of him didn't want to be there. So let's talk about, as Dr. Gray mentioned, cognitive behavioral treatments, exercising ambivalence. Here's what I mean by ambivalence. Ambivalence is simultaneously wanting and not wanting an object, feeling, or behavior. Simultaneously wanting and not wanting an object, feeling, or behavior. When the conflict between wanting and not wanting is excessive and painful, denial emerges and serves as an adaptive defense mechanism. And it does it by helping people feel better by splitting the ambivalent conflict and removing one of the components from awareness, leaving clients who flee into health. They might, after a single session, after an abbreviated session, after a simple talk, say, I think I'm all better. I understand it more than I ever did. I don't know that I need to come back. That's still resistance. And they're escaping the true conflict. Other clients might say, there's no chance that I can improve. My situation's awful. I don't have anything in my life. Will Rogers talked about ambivalence in a remarkable way. He said that Mississippi will drink wet and vote dry as long as any citizen can stagger to the polls. There are lots of tactics to stimulate ambivalence, and I'm not going to take a lot of time about these, but I do want to mention them. Ask open-ended, Columbo-like questions. Be confused. Let your client clarify your situation. Listen reflectively. Be affirmative. Support your client's efforts to participate in change activities. Summarize what's transpired during treatment from time to time. Elicit self-motivational statements. When I asked a client once many years ago what he had hoped for after treatment, he said he wanted to be president of IBM. Rather than be stunned by the objective, I just said, so how are you going to do it? What are the steps you have to go through? Let's alter your treatment plan to make this a possibility. Question patients evocatively. Help them to recognize their maps. See where they're going. See where they've been. Look both forward and backward. Contact them from time to time. Call them. Send a letter, especially after their early appointments, to let them know that you were thinking about their session and were looking forward to the next visit. Let me give some more specific and straightforward examples. I want you to think about marriage. Let's start with marriage. We'll get to methadone and gambling. Think about marriage. How do you feel when someone lets you know that they're getting married? What's your instinctive response? Think about it for a moment. Most people would say, congratulations. Now think about someone, a friend or colleague that says, I'm getting divorced. What's your instinctive response? Most likely it's, I'm sorry. Now you might listen in either case, but those are ambivalent and confused responses. Here's why. For a clinician, if someone says that they're going to detoxify from methadone, there's an instinctive response among clinicians to say, congratulations, when really you want to exercise the ambivalent feelings that underlie these kinds of changes. People get married ambivalently, people get divorced ambivalently, people detoxify from methadone ambivalently. So the question really is, how's that going to work for you? How did you decide? When did you decide? What's your plan? What do you think will make it difficult? What parts will be easy? What will you gain? What will you lose? Same thing's true for stopping gambling. It's quite fair to ask someone who says they're going to stop gambling, what's the plan? What are you going to give up? What are you going to get? It's always what will you lose, what will you gain, so that you cover both sides of the ambivalence. Now let's take a moment to consider the issues that hold the potential to limit treatment benefits. Sometimes countertransference and transference activities can make treatment feel stuck, both for clients and for providers. Countertransference exists when a therapist feels or acts toward a patient in ways that are neither part of the real relationship, rationally justified by the circumstances, nor part of the working alliance appropriate to the terms of the treatment contract. When this exists, a clinician is manifesting countertransference. Clients experience transference. And this emerges when during treatment, clients transfer or redirect their feelings that they once had for somebody else in their life toward their treatment provider. These feelings aren't part of the treatment alliance, they're not part of the real relationship, and they're not rationally justified by the circumstances. Originally, countertransference was thought to be a negative state that compromised treatment. Now, understanding clinician feelings helps providers to navigate the complex treatment circumstances that they often find themselves in. How the client makes you feel is likely how they make others feel. It's very important to recognize those feelings and examine them during treatment. Now, transference towards clinicians is common, and many of you have probably experienced clients that seem to adore you or clients that seem to despise you. It's unusual, by the way, for these feelings to emerge in a powerful way, because if you think of it, after 20 visits or 25 visits, almost 6 months, you've only known a client for about 20 hours, half a work week. Even though they've been coming for sessions for a 6-month period, they really don't know you very well. And they begin to underestimate when you present this in a descriptive way to them. They begin to understand the disproportion of their feelings. They begin to recognize that their feelings are not part of a typical treatment alliance. Pursuing and understanding transference and countertransference are essential to a successful therapy. We have to manage unrealistic feelings about our client. When we have unrealistic feelings, it's useful to seek consultation and supervision. Research we did many years ago at the division found that less than 50% of people who were in addiction treatment programs working as clinicians had any supervision. So I want to encourage you to develop supervisory programs and seek supervision when any of these feelings of adoring clients or despising clients emerge. Countertransference can help you advance the therapy. Notice how clients make you feel. And here's an example. This is an example from a marriage, but here we see a woman on the phone and she says, Phil suddenly decided to give up everything that was bad for him. No more smoking, drinking, junk food, or gambling. And he feels absolutely terrific. I don't think Phil is so happy. And yet, his wife is happy. She's happy because she got Phil to give things up, unlikely to sustain this pattern. Relapse is likely. Countertransference and the idea of intractable patients. Let's think about this for a moment. Clinicians are often disappointed with client progress, but patients are usually not ready to begin recovery tasks. So clients' expectations and clinicians' expectations don't match. Clinicians often have great difficulty tolerating clients' positive feelings about their gambling or drugging. Clients are coming to see you because they've had positive experiences with their gambling or drugging. If they didn't, they would have stopped already. They're now coming to you so that you can help them wish that they would want to stop. Once they have that wish, their change is energized, and they often will experience change. These thoughts of liking the object of their gambling or drugging generates too much anxiety for most therapists to bear. and a superficial therapeutic exploration of issues usually begins. And often these relationships yield very little, and clinician and patient alike report feeling stuck. However, therapists often blame their patients, and they blame them with elaborate theoretical rationalizations. We call these things theories sometimes, and they simply blame patients for their lack of progress. I want to illustrate this stuckness to you now. Misleading assumptions that clinicians make about their clients are often the driving force for maintaining countertransference feelings. Let's consider the 9-dot problem. The 9-dot problem requires you to use 4 straight lines to connect all 9 dots, never taking your writing instrument off the page. You want to connect all 9 dots with 4 straight lines, never taking your writing instrument off the page. I want you to think about this for a minute. You can do it on paper, you can do it in your imagination. I'm going to guess that connecting these 9 dots with 4 straight lines, never taking them off the paper, might begin looking like this. You start on any of 8 dots and leave 1 dot uncovered. So what do? You try again, starting on a different dot, leaving a different dot uncovered. A little frustration sets in, and you do it again, leaving yet another dot uncovered, only because you've started at another dot. If you're very creative, you might yield something like this, yielding 2 dots uncovered. Something's keeping you from solving this puzzle, and it is a solvable puzzle. Some of you may have seen it before. What are you assuming that's making this impossible to solve? Candidly, you're assuming that there's a square. I only talked about 4 dots in space, and you've assumed that you have to stay within the perimeter of the 9 dots. That assumption has made solving this problem impossible. It's your assumption. If you go outside of the perimeter of the dots, a solution becomes available, even if you don't remember it. Even if you don't remember it, you can stumble on this solution. But if you don't understand the assumptions that you've made with 9 dots in space, what's the likelihood that you're going to understand the assumptions you've made about a client who's having enormous difficulty and perhaps isn't the most responsive to your efforts to heal? So I want to urge you to look very carefully and closely at the assumptions you make with each of your cases so that you can begin to understand where stuckness in treatment might come from. Let's talk about another area where stuckness in treatment comes from: comorbidity and addiction. What do we treat and when? Well, Shakespeare reminded us long ago that misery acquaints a man with strange bedfellows. Alan Leshner, the then director of NIDA, was on a panel with me many years ago, and he asked the question of the audience, when is addiction addiction? He said you could ask it a different way. When is compulsion compulsion? I thought it was a terrific question. I was struggling with it for days, and then I began to realize I needed to make a slide. When is addiction addiction? We can take any addictive behavior. Today we're talking about gambling and or drugging. So let's call that an addictive behavior and identify a group of people that screen positively for this problem. And then we take that group and we evaluate them carefully for other psychiatric disorders. And we discover some have mania, Others have depression. And the addictive behavior is a way of managing mania or managing depression. Or maybe they have personality disorder and they're engaged in excessive antisocial behaviors simply as part of their personality disorder. This should remind you a little bit of Dr. Gray's description of the syndrome model. Well, to make the story shorter, there are many other unknown disorders that people might screen positively for, so that group of people that had addictive behaviors are not purely struggling with addiction, although we left a little space in the center of this Venn diagram to identify that. What's really happening is that most addictive behavior can be best understood by recognizing psychiatric comorbidity. And it's possible, in fact, according to the syndrome model, that all of these disorders are the result of a syndrome, an addiction syndrome. And the syndrome accounts for both psychiatric problems as well as the psychological and psychiatric problems associated with addiction. Comorbidity can influence treatment adherence. Co-occurring disorders can make patients seem like they're resistant, unmotivated, or otherwise unwilling to adhere to treatment protocols. So I want to finish my presentation today with a look at the common factors. What makes the treatments that work? What makes the treatments that work? The common factors. The therapy accounts for about 15 to 30% of treatment outcome, what we actually do. By the way, this comes from Hubble and his colleagues who wrote about the heart and soul of change, what works in therapy. The patient's extra therapeutic factors, their family, personality, economics, education, support systems, and so forth. The way they relate, whether they're empathic, whether they have interpersonal warmth, are they attractive, interpersonally attractive, are they encouraging? And finally, might surprise you that placebo effects account for about the same amount of treatment outcome variance as the therapeutic technique itself. So it's not necessarily what you do, but it's really how you do it. Ultimately, with few exceptions, for example, Narcan in the case of opioid overdose, it's not the treatment or treatment protocol that ultimately influences addiction, treatment outcomes. It's the compassion, the humanity that delivers these interventions. It's not what we do, but it's how we do it. It's empathy, love, respect, patience. So what are the keys to treatment and recovery? We need to make treatment more attractive and effective so people with addiction will participate. Very few people, estimates range to about 10% of people with addiction get treatment. 90% of people with addiction don't. We don't need to force people into treatment. And if we can make our addiction treatment more attractive, more caring, more accepting, we won't need special outreach to attract people into treatment. We need to focus more on what addiction does for people than what it does to them. With my colleagues in the syndrome paper, we concluded that the necessary tools for improving addiction treatment might be already available. All that's required to enhance the use of these devices is a rethinking of addiction. We need to understand addiction differently. There are 5 action steps to recovery. I'm not going to mention each of these, but I do want to point out to you that over the past 45 years of treating addiction, people say to me, why do people use drugs and how do we change them? Most people use drugs because it does something for them somewhere in their life. And most people change using 5 practical sets of activities. Setting dates and sharing it with friends, changing the environment that they're in, learning and practicing old and favorite activities as well as developing new activities. They review their failed quit attempts so that they learn from them. They understand that relapse is part of recovery, and they create a recovery network of supportive people. These seem to be 5 cornerstones of recovery. And let me just say that my colleague John Knight, a wonderful physician, said that when all else fails, we need to communicate the following. I care about you, I'm concerned about you, and I'll be here for you. We need to let our clients know that they're important to us, because in most places, addiction is a repelling condition that affects not only loved ones, but clinicians. I'm going to stop by sharing with you resources for our Division on Addiction, contacting us, our free basis, which is published weekly, our Transparency Project, our Expressions of Addiction, my email. Feel free to send me an email with questions or comments, and a Twitter handle. Thank you.
This concludes the webinar. Thank you so much.